Hi there, this is Penelope. This is the fourth video in a series of short videos covering off Test 1, Trimester 2, 2021, and this is question 4. Now you look at the graph on the cover sheet here, it is actually the one, or the blue one, is the graph that's in the question, in the first part of the question, but I think it's just useful here to compare the red with the blue, and you can see there that that's about 2.8, but you can also see that the top is 2.8. A lot of you took 2 as being the amplitude. It's not. That's where it cuts the vertical axis, but it's not the top. It's not an indication of the amplitude. So the question does ask you, part 1, what is the amplitude? Or in the terms of the question, I think a little a would be done. Maybe I'd put amplitude equals a, and you read it off. It's the bottom or the top. The top is not recorded, so we look at the bottom, and the negative sign is just indicative of the distance down. So the actual distance is 2.8. So the amplitude is 2.8. Then you have to find S. So we've now got y equals 2.8 sine x plus s. We know when x equals 0 that y equals 2. That's from the graph. So we can use that because then we can replace x with 0. So we'd say 2 equals 2.8 sine s, since x equals 0. That gives us that 2 over 2.8 equals sine s. So inverse sine equals inverse sine of the other side as well. So that gives us that, using a calculator, that s is either 0.796 if we're in radians, if your calculator's in radians, or 45.6 degrees. It doesn't specify, so either of those answers was correct or acceptable. The third part is just to put those three together. So now we can say y is equal to the amplitude, which was 2.8 sine x plus, and whatever you worked out in part 2, 0.796, or y is equal to 2.8 sine x plus 45.6. You don't have to have both, one is fine. Next question asks you to prove something, and we don't very often have to prove something, but this is moderately easy, and using one of the identities, so using the trig identity on your sheet, on your formula sheet, you can find that sine 2x is going to be equal to 2 sine x cos x. This is working down the left hand side. So that's squared, which we wrote as superscript 2 is going to be 2 sine x cos x squared, which is 4 sine squared cos squared x. Now that's not quite where we need to be, but on the right hand side then 4 sine squared x times 1 minus sine squared x is equal to 4 sine squared x times cos squared x, since we know that sine squared x plus cos squared x equals 1. So it wasn't a very difficult proof, and that's shown by the number of marks that it was worth. It was only worth 2 marks. The last question in this one. Okay, so we're told that negative 90 is less than theta, which is less than 90 degrees, and we've got to solve tan of 2 theta plus 45 equals negative 1. Now, I always suggest that you replace that to make it just look a little bit easier. So then we have tan z equals negative 1, and tan is positive in quadrant 1. Sorry, tan is negative actually. Negative, I should read what I've written. Tan is negative in quadrant 2. All science, tan is positive in 3, so it must be negative in 4. So there and there. Oops, wrong place. I should look where I'm drawing. There. Okay, so z then equals, what do we need? Z equals, using your calculator, negative 45, because remember your calculator's in degrees. So that must be the last one there, and we could write it as negative 45, or we could change it. Let's just leave that for the moment. And then we need to find the one in the quadrant labelled 2, so that would be 180 minus 45, which would be 135. But that is z. So if z equals 2 theta plus 45, then z minus 45 divided by 2 is equal to theta. So if we do that, z minus 45 would be z plus, negative 45 minus 45 divided by 2. You know, sometimes when you're writing things you think, actually, maybe I shouldn't have written it like that. Maybe we need to write negative 45 as 315. Maybe that will work better. Now we can say z minus 45 over 2. So we've got 315 minus 45 divided by 2. So 135, or 135 minus 45 divided by 2 is 45. Now that's just a bit of an issue because that doesn't work. This one is fine, but we need to perhaps go back and think, well, maybe we needed to write 135 in a different format, and maybe think that actually that negative 45 was the correct answer as well. Okay. In actual fact, what we could have done to achieve the negative 45 was we could have just said from negative 45, we could have done a side working over here. Negative 45 minus 45 over 2 is just going to directly give you that, or the 45 that we already had. So it doesn't matter which way your thinking goes. Both of those answers are between negative 90 and 90. Okay.